Alright, Shalom, Israelites. This is a message from the Israelite Brotherhood. Message from the Israelite Brotherhood. Alright, Israelites. We about the only people on the face of this earth that don't mind being in captivity if we got some comfort. The Israelites love to stay in captivity if they have some comfort, and you can see this in Tanakh history. In Tanakh history, especially in Exodus. In Exodus, when Almighty Yah brung us up out of Egypt by prophet Moses, and then how the Israelites complained the whole time. Whatever little troubles that they encountered, instead of believing in Almighty Yah and going for freedom, how the Israelites chose and wanted to go back to Egypt. Man, there's all kind of verses in the Tanakh that show that the Israelites wanted to go back to Egypt, and that's awful because, we should want to be free. We should want to be free like any other ethnic group on earth that has their own land and their own heritage. But the enemy know that once he get the Israelites in captivity, that they're going to stay. And they're going to fight to stay in captivity, especially if you put them on a false god. You know what I'm saying? Put them on false gods, as the Israelites did when they was in Egypt, our ancestors, when they was in Egypt, and then prophet Moses come to free them. They didn't really want to be free. And how did they wanted to go back to comfort? They not going to fight Pharaoh to get free, and how it took prophet Moses and Almighty Yah, Almighty Yah sending prophet Moses to drive us out. You know what I'm saying? To Egypt. Egypt had to experience some hardships, some pain, and that'll be the plagues that Almighty Yah put on Egypt. And then the Israelites, left. But then after we got, away from Egypt, we start complaining about going back to Egypt because it was comfort there. Israelites, are the only people on the face of the earth that if you get them some comfort in captivity, that they gonna stay. And especially if you put them on a false god and give them some comfort, they gonna stay. And that's what Pharaoh tried to do from the beginning. When he gave Joseph the false name, when he renamed Joseph and gave him that false name, and then, gave him the priest's daughter, hoping that, Joseph would be satisfied with his conditions. Pharaoh knew that we was in the land of Canaan because they called us Hebrews, throughout Tanakh, in Genesis, we was referred to as Hebrews, the Hebrews, if you go to Genesis 45. Let's do 45 because after Joseph showed, Pharaoh what was going to happen to him, showed Pharaoh what was going to happen to Egypt, and then Pharaoh, called his magicians and his sorcerers, and then they couldn't get it right. But that how Joseph, prophecies and predictions were right, and that Pharaoh knew, that we was in Egypt. Pharaoh knew, if you go to Genesis, that'd be Genesis 45, 17. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, say unto thy brethren, this do ye lead your beasts and go unto the land of Canaan, and take your father in your household and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and ye shall eat the fat of the land. Pharaoh knew that once he got us in Egypt, because Pharaoh knew that we worship different from the Egyptians. And Pharaoh knew that once he got us in Egypt, and then we got to eating good and comfortable and stuff, that we would eventually probably stay and probably wouldn't want to leave Egypt and go back to the land of Canaan. And that was a slick move, and that how Pharaoh had change Joseph's name like they did us Hebrews here in captivity. Change our name, you know what I'm saying? And then give us something good to eat. Look, and Pharaoh called Joseph name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Him giving Joseph the priest of On daughter, knowing that she worshiped different because of her father, in the Egyptian uh, uh, religious system, that would probably influence Joseph, especially if he going up in her and didn't have kids as he did Manasseh and Ephraim, and that they was hoping that Joseph would be content in Egypt. And then when Joseph eventually went and got our other family members, his brothers and his father, and brought them to Egypt, that Pharaoh probably cited a sign of relief, because now the Hebrews, the one God worshippers, are not in the way. They're not in Canaan. They're not in Canaan. And he don't have to worry about, them. You know what I'm saying? He don't have to worry about us, and that how he can go to Mesopotamia. You see, he can go to Mesopotamia and do trade with the other multiple God worshiping systems and so forth, and then how he had slick got us out the way, so he thought. And then when the bondage come down on us because another Pharaoh had come into power, that they didn't respect nothing that Joseph had done, and then put the locks on us, but because they done fed us and done fattened us, now let's lock them down. And then that's what the Pharaoh did. And then how the Israelites was kind of content with that situation, as shown when the prophet Moses struck that Egyptian down for harming the Israelite, and then the Israelite got mad. Is you gonna get me the same as you got him? You know what I'm saying? Instead of siding with Prophet Moses, and then, hey, y'all, let's start a rebellion. And then let's make it hard for Pharaoh so we can get out of here. But no, the Israelites was content. They was content with their situation. They had comfort, just like now. The Israelites in captivity in the same like Egyptian system, where they done changed our name and they done fattened us up. And now Israelites, man, they'd rather stay on the gods in the religions that they was given in captivity. We know what that is. We know which religion that is that we was given in captivity, because we didn't come over from Africa believing in Christianity in no form or fashion, and how that was totally forced on us on the plantation, and what it was to make us content. They done fed us, and now they done gave us a God, you know what I'm saying, to worship. Now we still slaves, but they know that once an Israelite is fed and given false gods in captivity, that man, 9 out of 10, they is not gonna want to leave captivity, and how they gonna be satisfied with their situation, and will make up all kind of excuses to stay in bondage. That's how Israelite is, and you can see that, man, in Exodus. Let's go to Exodus 14. 11, when Prophet Moses and them brung us up out of Egypt, because Almighty Yah put the plagues on Egypt. And then how the Israelites complained the whole time, till we got in the promised land, the little fruit, because Almighty Yah had to make us wander around 40 years in the desert until the Israelites were destroyed, and just the fruit made it to a whole new group of Israelites that grew up, that hadn't experienced captivity, hadn't experienced being fattened, you know what I'm saying, to stay in captivity. And then how that new generation that had growed up, they didn't know nothing about Egypt, went into the promised land. It almost got to be like that now. Sad to say, You know, but if you go to Genesis, man, that'll be 11. Genesis 14, man, 11. And they said unto Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore, wherefore hast thou dealt with us to carry us forth out of Egypt? You know, is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. That's like the Israelites are like that now. Like that now, man, they just like that now. Long as they got some comfort, man, a little wealth, and can move around, in captivity, they satisfied. And then especially if Pharaoh then gave them a false god, you know, like this system did, then the Israelites is satisfied, man. He gonna be cool. He gonna be cool with captivity and stuff, and he ain't gonna want to be free. You know, go to Genesis 16. 16, and it's the same thing. Look, Genesis 16, Exodus 16. Exodus 16, 3. And that other verse would be Exodus 11:12. Look, and the children of Israel said unto them, would to Yah we had died in the land, died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to the full. For ye have brought us forth into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly. You know, long as the Israelite got some food and he's fattened up, then he ain't gonna want no freedom. He ain't gonna want no freedom and stuff. You know, if you go to Numbers 14, that'd be Numbers 14. Let me see, Numbers 14, 4. The same thing. You know, if an Israelite man is in bondage and he got a false god put on him, doing his bondage, and then Pharaoh feed him, you know what I'm saying, and he get full and fat, he not gonna want to leave, you know, captivity, you know. And it was like that probably in Assyria. It was probably like that in Babylon. You know, that Israelites, men would prefer to be in captivity and fed, and especially if they own a false god, that they not finna try to get free. They not finna try to get free because they comfortable, and that's how Israelites is now. You know, if captivity got comfort, they finna stay and they finna resist. Especially if you then gave them a false god and a false way of worship, then they finna resist freedom, and they not finna support nothing that got to do with freedom. They'll turn their nose up at it. They ain't finna help themselves get free in no kind of way. In no kind of way. Look here. That's Numbers 14:4. And they said one to another, let me see, and wherefore, this 14:3. Well, let's go to 14:2. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses, against Aaron, the whole congregation said to them, would Yah that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would Yah we had died in the wilderness? And wherefore had the Elohim brought us into the land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be prey? Were it not better for us to return to Egypt? And they said one to another, let us make a captain, and let us return into Egypt. You know, the Egyptians had us as slaves, making bricks, and building their treasure cities and everything. But long as they fed the Israelites, and then they had a false god to worship, the Israelites was content. That's just the way it is now, man. If you go to Genesis 16:13, and it says, It is a small thing that thou hast brought us out of the land that floweth with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, except thou make thyself altogether prince over us. Moreover, hast thou not brought us into the land that floweth with milk and honey, and given us in that? Man, they wanted to go back to Egypt. We wanted to go back to Egypt because, like I say, if an Israelite got comfort in captivity, you know what I'm saying, that they don't want to get free. And then especially if you put them on a false god, some false religion, they not wanting to get free. And that's like the system that we in now. They did just the same thing. They make it where you can have some wealth and then fatten you up, and then gave you a false god, and you don't want to be free. You happy in your condition, especially if you got a nice big house, you got a car, you know what I'm saying, and you can ride around, and then you can eat good, that you happy with captivity, and that you will resist captivity of freedom and turn your nose up, you know what I'm saying, against the suggestion of freedom. And if somebody try to show you a way of freedom or that we could possibly get free, you're going to resist that. And you're going to say, that person crazy. That I got all my wealth and I'm happy here. I'm doing good here. Why should I struggle and try to make change? That I'm happy here. And this false God done did everything for me. And I'm happy with the false God that they done gave me in slavery. It's the true God. That's how Israelite is, man, and that's a shame. We the only people on the face of the earth that's like that. Is why it's documented in the Bible, and all the tribes, their forefathers' original beginning history is documented in the Tanakh of how those peoples would be. And we are the only people out of all the other ethnic groups on the face of this earth that if you fatten us up and give us a little wealth, that how we are like to stay in captivity and how we won't resist. We won't support nothing that got to do with trying to get free or even talking about freedom, that how we'll turn our nose up. You know what I'm saying? But let the false God worship in its institutions need some support, and how the Israelites poured in on them, poured in on false gods institutions because they comfortable, and then they attribute their comfort to that false god in its institutions. Go to Numbers 5. Go to Numbers 5, and then you will read, and wherefore have ye made us to come up out of Egypt to bring us into this evil place? Is it not a place of seed or figs or vine or a pomegranate? Neither is there any water men to drink. We gave prophet Moses pure troubles, pure troubles. When he was bringing us into freedom where we can govern ourselves and where we can have our own institutions, where we can have our own army and we can have our own everything, and how the Israelites resisted that the whole time. And then you can see that we was on the false God worship, because if you go to Exodus, I think that's Exodus 32, that as soon as Moses left, that the people, the person that want us to get free and be free and have our own, that our ancestors turned to false God worship. They turned to false God worship. And it's right here, look. Man, they turned to false God worship. You know what I'm saying? To go to camp. And when the people saw, this is Exodus 32, and when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together and said unto Aaron, men unto him, up and make us gods which shall go before us. For as for this man, the Moses that brought us out of the land of Egypt, we know what not has become of him. And Aaron says, so what it is, we went to what was familiar with us. The golden calf is Hathor, and Hathor, and that's the Queen of Heaven, and that's Is Horus, and they turned that institution of Is Horus into Christianity, the mother and the child. The mother and the child is the same as the Queen of Heaven in the Bible, and we was familiar with worshiping it. Is why it was a chosen religion to put on us in slavery, because they know once they fed us, even if they turn us loose some, that if they fed us and gave us that false God, that we will be content and with comfort in captivity. And that's the way the Israelites are now today. And then to show this, man, if you go to man, that'd be Jeremiah 44, as we was being destroyed, by the other nations, because Almighty Yah said y'all ain't gonna be able to do this Egyptian religion that you was comfortable with in captivity, that you're not gonna be able to do that here, and it was a law meant against doing any religion, because Almighty Yah know that the Israelites are, if this religion brought comfort, and that the Israelites mean abandon everything that he told us, and then that eventually happened. Man, if you go to Genesis, man, I think 44:15, and it's right here when we finally went back to Egypt to bondage, because it was comfortable there. Look. So that none of the remaining Judah which are gone. All right. Then this is Jeremiah 44:15. Then all the men which knew that their wives had burnt incense unto other gods, and all the women that stood by, a great multitude of all the people that dwelled in the land of Egypt and Pathros, answered Jeremiah, as for the word that thou hast spoken unto us in the name of the Elohim, we will not hearken unto thee, but we will certainly do so whatever thing go forth out of our own mouth, to burn incense unto the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings, and our princes in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then had we plenty of food, and were well, and saw no evil. But since we left off to burn incense unto the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, we have wanted all things, and have been consumed by the sword and by the famine. So, the Israelites right now today, the Israelites, man, they doing good, you know what I'm saying? And they can stretch out, and they can do a whole bunch of things, got nice, comfortable beds, but we're not free. Our ancestors come over here in bondage on slave ships, and even though the slave owners so-called release you, all he did was fatten you up and gave you the God. He had to give you that false God before he turned you loose, and make sure that you was on it. So when you got turned loose, that you not finna want your freedom, and that you gonna turn your nose up at freedom. You're going to turn your nose up at freedom and say, this is not it. This is not the way. And that's how Israelites are today. They comfortable to have comfort. The Israelites love to stay in captivity if they have comfort. And it's just like that now today. The Israelites is not fighting men to be free. They don't mean Israelites got all kind of resources, men, to put together and come up with a plan, men, to get free so we can have our own. No, sir. No, sir. Long as the slave owners providing a wealth, and you can work in the system and then gather a little wealth, but because they're going to let some of us slide through the door to be a token to the rest of us, and that if you try to achieve all your goals in captivity without thinking of freedom and so forth, that Israelites should be content and be happy with being in captivity and so forth. And that's why it's hard for us to get free now, because we got a long history of wanting to stay in captivity if we have some comfort. And those are the Israelites that mostly believe in these religions that was given to us during the slavery days. You know, even though our mothers and fathers believed in them religions that we think that, hey, that it's right and it's okay, but it's just like the Israelites in the Tanakh, where they mothers and fathers was giving them false religions in Egypt, but then it was a different way because Prophet Moses showed us the different way, you know, and that it was a true Yah that wanted us to be free and wanted us to worship him correctly, and Israelites resisted that the whole time. That's like I show in Tanakh history how we only got 857 years on the promised land, and that how that the people that we abandoned our heritage to will believe in Yah and do Sabbaths and so forth, and how they hate captivity and how they hate to be fed, and they'll fight not to be in captivity and so forth. But us Israelites, no sir, we gonna stay in captivity if we got some comfort. And the Tanakh it is our history book that show how we are and what kind of people we are. And then we resist freedom. We resist freedom long as we got some good food and we got some nice clean clothes and some shoes to put on, and can ride around in a fancy car that man that, and then have a false God introduced to us. Man, the Israelite gonna stay in captivity. And I just showed you that when we start having troubles in the book of Jeremiah, gonna be like our last little act on the promised land with them false gods, that we went back to the original source of where those false gods was. What happened to us? We end up in captivity. We was in captivity in Egypt, and then we in captivity now. And the Israelites have comfort now, and we stuck. And very few want to get free. That's why come Almighty Yah gonna probably make it like it was when we left. And those that love captivity and like to stay in captivity instead of trying to get free and support freedom, that they gonna perish here in captivity, and that they not gonna see the land. They not gonna see the land and have freedom, and where we can guide our own destiny and make our own choices without a system being over us. That's like now. You got to pay taxes. You got to pay taxes on everything. That's a form of slavery. You know, work for your home, you still got to pay taxes on it. You go to work, man, they still taking the tax out of you. And every time you turn around, they taxing you. Man, that's a form of captivity, because if we was by ourselves and we had control of our own land, we wouldn't be taxing ourselves like that, not even to support a system, because in the Tanakh days, everybody had to contribute their own free will. You know, your free will offerings. But, man, like I say, man, Israelites, man, we got a history of wanting to stay in captivity if we got some comfort. We got to break up from that. We got to break up from that, man, and we got to show enough get ourselves together, because there's a lot of things that's going on in the promised land that might result in our freedom. And some of you Israelites ain't gonna want to go to get a new start like we did leaving Egypt, going into the wilderness, and then going into the promised land. That how Israelites gonna resist that, and it's gonna be just like the same way where they gonna say he crazy, man, for wanting to be free and go over there when we got everything right here. You know, that's how Israelite is, man, and he would choose captivity with comfort over freedom with a little hardship, man. A little hardship is the test to show that you're gonna make it when you do get to your freedom spot. You know, Israelites was in captivity in Assyria. It took Almighty Yah to destroy the Assyrians. Israelites was in captivity in Babylon. It took Almighty Yah to destroy, man, the Babylonians. Israelites was in bondage in Egypt. It took Almighty Yah to destroy the Egyptians. Man, we ain't tried to get free none on our own. That it always took Almighty Yah to get us free. And that's like this system now. It's finna be destroyed. You know, Israelites gonna moan and groan when this system get destroyed because this where they comfort at in captivity. They done forgot that we come to this land in slave ships, you know, giving false names like Joseph was, and then being enticed to be on false gods like they did Joseph when they gave him Asenath, you know, the priest of On's daughter. Alright, Israelites, this is a message from the Israelite Brotherhood. We got to wake up, man. We can't, because you got comfort in captivity, that should make it easier for you to want to get free and not have the hardships trying to do it.